Say Something. It's like a podcast, but it's a vodcast, so you can listen and watch. It's like news talk or sports talk, but it's life talk, so we can walk the road together. On today's show, we chat with Grant Skeldon and Wendy Whiteman on societal reconciliation. Is it possible in today's climate to rise above polarizing topics like race, religion, and politics? Well, there's no easy way to discuss this topic, but we're going to try, spurred by Global Movement Day, whose mission is reconciliation. Thanks for joining the conversation. Here we go.
Again, in the midst of bad things happening in communities that have to do with what looks like differences on the outside and even on the inside, because it could be your political views, it could be your spiritual views, it could be like where you grew up, the color of your skin, I mean, you name it. It's so against, it's like, why not talk about it? So y'all are so sweet to I think it's Movement Day that really unites each one of us. And Movement Day is a movement, so to speak, that started really in New York, and it was to bring people together, an effort to unify, because there's no reason not to be unified. There's that saying, and I don't know who said it, maybe y'all do, but the only thing that lasts, that's eternal, is God's word and the souls of men. And if this men and women, people are important, why in the world do we travel so hard against each other and not beside each other? Okay.
This is my friend Wendy. I've got my 2 friends here. 3 friends here.
Brenda's friend.
Oh my gosh.
This is a special to be
I'm so
an FOB. A friend of Brenda.
I am
Forget about Bill. It's with Brenda. Brenda, Bill, the FOBs, Bill Clinton. That's what they call them, FOBs.
I'm surrounded by such wonderful friends, and I think that makes me a better person. So, Wendy, you want to introduce yourself a little bit? This is Wendy. I'll tell her, introduce yourself, and then I start talking.
No, that's good.
So,
You're fine. You're doing great. I'm Wendy Whiteman, and I'm originally from Dallas. I'm an attorney. I practice in elder law and estate planning, and I've known Brenda for quite a while, and excited about Movement Day as well. So
you'll be a part of Movement Day this year.
Yes.
All right. You'll be at Global Movement Day.
Yes.
So we're excited about that.
Yes.
And Grant, you've been a part of Movement Day for many years as well.
Have you been from the get-go?
No. I was working at Papados when it first started.
Stop!
I love Papa.
And then Mac in the group kind of found me and asked if I wanted to be involved. I never knew that Initiative is the organization that I lead and founded, but at first it was a campaign to get young adults to Movement Day. It just, the response was so many hundred young adults responding that we were like, man, let's continue to cultivate relationships between the young, diverse millennials in the city. And I think also something that drives me is every generation tends to like repeat what the generation before did, but in the exact opposite direction. It's like, my parents did this and their generation were like this, I'm gonna go over here, and that's not like the right way always either.
Right,
so,
that pendulum swing.
Mm-hmm. So basically, just if I could get young leaders that I know around the business leaders, political leaders, church leaders, and nonprofit leaders that Movement Day was getting, that was already invested in the welfare of the city, then we wouldn't repeat mistakes over and over again. That it's so interesting with like the conversation around race, racism, tension, what a lot of people call racial tension in the country, that there rarely is usually a 20-something, because it is a little different for them, like in the sense that they grew up maybe around more diversity naturally and didn't get exposed to as much tension as generations before. Like you hear about it and you learn about it as if it's something in the past, like history, but you don't. I'm not saying you don't experience it. I'm just saying
totally
there's
different.
more likeliness that, oh, I didn't know we're just not supposed to be okay with each other, kind of. But there definitely is. I've seen racial tension among young adults too. Like I grew up in Louisville High School on a basketball team, predominantly with African Americans, and then there was 2 to 3 guys that weren't black. So what was interesting is we played against Flower Mound High School, and I'm not saying this represents at all of Flower Mound, but this is just last year they were in the news for holding up signs where it said white power at a basketball game. And I remember playing against Marcus and Flower Mound and certain school districts that were predominantly all white, and remember the chants being like, welfare babies, we know our daddy, how about you?
Wow.
And
Wait.
Wow.
that happened. I mean, Channel 8 News, Dylan Henson did a story on this just last year, so that's still among young people.
Okay.
Wow.
That shocks me and it makes my heart hurt.
Yeah.
Like, you should ask a young adult, hey, who's Rodney King? Like, ask them, because they may not really know much of, like, I think, like, they'll have, oh yeah, isn't he the guy? But it's not gonna be like, oh, I absolutely know who that is. I absolutely know. So it's just some things, I mean, there's certain things, like you guys just said the FOB, like Friends of
That's
Both
so
Friends.
true.
I never heard that. For what it's worth, I just started trying to watch The West Wing. Like, but there's things that I
Get
just,
ready, you're gonna
miss.
binge watch. My nephews just did it.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
You know, Wendy, we're talking about filters, and Brent, I think you bring up a good point. It's like your friends and that millennial group, they don't have the same filter, so they're not responding to the things that they see the same way. And so
Okay.
that was a really interesting conversation we had a couple weeks ago about the filters we have and how we respond to some of the things we're seeing in the news right now.
Yeah, we were talking about, you know, basically our approach to the heightened situation in the media and the city, and for me, I really have to take a look at my Christian walk first and foremost, and then make that response. Because when I look at it from that angle, it just brings everything down about 50 notches. You know, not from a emotional or sensory type response, because emotions can become heightened, and that's in any situation, in any conversation. But if you can take a step back, take a deep breath,
You're right.
and really see it from the kingdom's perspective, and I think everybody can come together at that point, or at least you can diffuse situations where another person who may not be Christian, you can calm it down, and then maybe get to a point of discussion and a point of reconciliation. So that's been working for me so far, and because you've got so many different perspectives on it, and people get angry, they get emotional, and you can't really have a productive conversation when
Everybody
when
thinks
you're
so.
overly emotional.
Right, and that's where one thing this guy said that I thought was interesting in this article. He said, in effect, our recent history underscores the point that too many people and institutions in today's world have simply lost perspective on what it means to be morally consistent and accountable. And you let the differences so far override that it makes it all about the difference and what it is like to be the other. And it's very hard. I heard last week on NPR an interview that was after the Charlotte incident, and this guy said the day before it happened, he could walk down the street and have eye contact and talk with somebody. And he said that next day after it, no one even put their head up. And that just, I know it's so sad about what that does and why.
Isn't that interesting?
I know, do you have to get to the why to be able to get to the other side?
And how we respond, because do we attach our response with the color of our skin? You may not feel a certain way necessarily, or you may not even know how to feel, but you defer to your history. Maybe, perhaps, I don't know.
I don't know how anybody doesn't defer to their history. I mean, it's kind of who you
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. But now, if we are hearing things, though, through a jaded lens, through a broken lens,
Which is your history.
yeah, and so that's going to change the outcome. It's going to affect.
Well, sure, and everybody's history is broken.
Right.
Right.
I don't think
exactly.
anybody's
That's true.
history, not in some negative way without hope. And therein lies your lens that you're going to. It's the lens of hope. And so I'd love to hear what y'all experienced, even through Movement Day, the positive things. And not to make it all about Movement Day, I just think it's interesting that someone has said it, they're trying it, there's actions, there's steps, there's coming together, there's different opinions that are in the same room as human beings, people. And what have y'all seen?
Do you want to share? I can share. It won't necessarily be a Movement Day story,
Okay.
but it'll be a story of hope. I gotta show you some pictures. We can I'm sure put it on
Yes, we will. And while you're looking for the picture, keep that thought. I'm just making sure.
So this was me in high school when I said I was on the basketball team.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is me with my best friend. Even to this day, he's still one of my closest friends. We hung out just 2 weeks ago from middle school. And then my family's Mexican also on my mom's side. But like I said, on the basketball team, same guy from middle school.
Mm-hmm.
So this is me. Now, here's how drastic things changed once I became a Christian. If you can tell, like, very different communities, predominantly Hispanic, African American, and then white. And what was interesting for me, like, what I realized very quickly is that I had some like racial tension towards the white community and the wealthier community. Like, it's so funny because, and then I try to assimilate because I started wearing American Eagle. I showed them this is me for when I said I was playing basketball, and then I became a Christian. It was at a predominantly all white church, and I think that a couple things I noticed. One, there are racially diverse churches, but there's not like usually a church that's racially diverse.
Yeah.
So if you want to go to a black church, you can go to a black church or a white church, or a Hispanic church, but it's really hard to find a multicultural church. So it made it really hard for me to invite my friends to this church because they stood out. And it's not that no one made them feel like they belonged. It was just they just didn't look like they belonged by the way they dressed, by the way they looked.
And the way you perceive yourself.
Yeah.
Your own self-image.
But then going to the places where predominantly white people hung out, because I didn't hang out with that many until becoming a Christian, I always joke that I then got introduced to the other trinity of the church, which is Starbucks, Chipotle, and Chick-fil-A. I had never been to any of those three places until I became a Christian. And so there was a mix kind of white culture and Christian culture. And I was like, oh, is this a Christian thing or is this a white thing? And I don't know if it's kind of like both Christian, white. But it's like Starbucks, Chipotle, and Chick-fil-A. And those are like, you're going to go to one of those places at least once a week.
It's
like,
so true.
But I had never been there. And none of my friends were like, let's go to Starbucks. Like, that wasn't the culture.
Yeah.
So there's just so many new things, but part of it, what I realized, because there was like a family in Flower Mound, ironically the same city that did those chants, that they kind of borderline adopted me and modeled, man, this is what it looks like to be a man. This is what a healthy family looks like. Not that they ever said that. I just saw it.
Right.
And I was like, it was caught, not taught.
Yeah, I love that it was caught, not taught. That it wasn't like something that was slammed at you. It was lived out, which I think is a big part of the answer.
And it made me where I think people that can be in all groups, because there are a few I was just in West Dallas. My church is in deep into West Dallas. It's Mercy Street Church. There are certain people that they wouldn't normally like maybe drive into this neighborhood, or people in this neighborhood maybe drive into West Dallas for like, because why would you go there?
Right.
But to be, if you can go in those worlds, like be a bridge to both of those different worlds, because. I've found that both worlds want to know each other. It's just there's not many avenues or even people as avenues to create that bridge. But I think that's what it did for me is that family and that community that adopted me. I started defending like, hey, not because this is honestly what it felt like is if you're white and you're rich, you're arrogant or you're greedy. And I found out, man, that's not true. Like that's a perception. Just like they may have perception of our school of like we don't know our dad. That's not true either. So you got to communicate on both sides.
That's so true. We have a niece that moved. My husband is a missionary kid, so he grew up in Bolivia. He is very tall, like 6'2", with red hair. And so he stuck out in Bolivia, as you can imagine. And so he was definitely the minority there, and he could be seen wherever he went. And it was interesting because when coming back to the United States, it was hard for them because they come back and it's that same kind of thing, sort of wondering, well, how can you go spend money on this, and this when so many people are suffering? And you know that $100 whatever pair of shoes you bought, that could be a year worth of food for somebody. And so there was this major disconnect and slight judgment, kind of like what you're saying. And it was interesting at one point because his parents were in town, and I have some friends that have been very blessed financially. And they had been to Bolivia because they had opened an orphanage there, helped an orphanage there. Then once they went, their heart's there. And equally in Africa and putting wells, like starting wells, water wells. And as they sat at the table, I watched the very interesting dynamic. And as we sat there, it was like, no, this guy, because he's been blessed, just because he's been blessed, he is a hard worker, and he, you know, he was born where he was born, and but he can pick up the phone and call anybody in his world and say, I need to do a well here, and they go, how many? And then the money's right there. And so they're taking care of this side of what needs to be done. It's not none of their business. It's just who they are and where they are. That comes with its own heartache. I would never want it. And then you have these people that are on the ground who are literally physically touching and loving and embracing and teaching. But they, you know, it was like this beautiful, I was sitting there at the dinner going, okay, this is beautiful because you've got it all working together. And then watching through the evening all of the preconceived ideas being stripped away, and this beautiful friendship and relationship that was on the other side of that, where they knew each other, but it took talking.
The image that comes to mind for me as you're talking about that is, do you remember 9/11 when everyone was covered with the ash and the soot, and everyone was one color? It was a tragic moment in our history.
Oh,
but
that like just gave me chills. Okay, just like you've never done the FOB, I'm not sure I've ever thought of it all the same color. And you're right, it was everybody was covered, and there was a oneness.
Yes. Yeah, it didn't matter.
It didn't matter.
If there was a need there, we were loving on each other well. It didn't matter what your background was. If you had $10 in your bank account or 10 million, we were just loving on one another.
Yes.
Can I ask you a question? I want to know, like, in y'all's lives, was there a moment where you felt like, man, there's like, I kind of share maybe what we'll call like healing in the heart towards, like, we all kind of said, no matter what, like, your history and your background kind of does dictate your biases and how you see the world. But was there a moment or an experience in y'all's life where, not that it changed everything, but it was like, whoa, like there's some healing that happened through this story?
You know, I don't know about that, but I tell you, my mom never raised me to see color. She never did. And that was such a blessing.
Mine the same way.
And I've raised my children
the
the
same.
same.
You didn't think about it.
Yeah.
You've never seen it.
What about you, Wendy?
Well, you know, I think it, you know, obviously it's rooted in fear, the whole concept, and that's why I have to take a few steps back to see if my reaction is coming from my senses, or is it coming from my spirit? Because otherwise I'm going to make the wrong choice on how I see things and how I react to people. And, you know, and I think it's not just racism. It is a mixture of several isms, like classism.
Yes.
I've witnessed very wealthy people and other more wealthy people, and that interaction where if you're not in this level of wealth, then you're not in that class, and they were all the same color.
Right.
So it's and they're cliques.
Yeah.
So I think we want to, because of the conversation today, we want to divide it between color, but it's really deeper than that.
I'm glad you went there.
It's a scar that needs to be healed. And if
In
we don't
so
approach
many
it in a
facets.
certain way, it'll never be healed. We'll be dealing with the surface. And I think all of us can say truly that, you know, it's a matter of just getting to know someone. When you sit down with a person, generally, no matter what color they are, the church I attend now, we've had a racial reconciliation small group. And we had Hispanic, and we had Black, and we had white. And it was so much fun. Everybody was so excited to do it, and we were coding people to figure out where they would go, you know, so that the group would be racially diverse when they got to their home.
Right.
So, but it was just so much fun to do it, and I do commend them for taking it on, because the population there is a third Black, a third white, and a third Hispanic. And I was like, what a great time to do this.
Isn't that the truth?
And but the one thing we did have in common, and I know that's a little different when people are believers, you've got Jesus in common.
Right.
But when you're not, you take that whole element out, and that's a whole different ball game. But just generally sitting down with people and getting to know them one-on-one, I really think it really helps them see your person just like I'm a person.
I think the hard part is getting to the sitting down. And,
Yes.
And as you said that, it made me think of a couple of things. It made me think of the religious issues right now, that it's very hard to even talk about it because of what is assumed by what you mean by that. It's like instantly you're written off because a whole picture of who knows what is portrayed, even if you say the word Christian, you know, and often it's not happy thoughts. Or the strange political environment that we are in right now, which I think is, I know there's nothing new under the sun. This seems different. I've never seen such hatred between factions. I mean, why would you ever even out loud say, you know, that you like one or the other candidates? Because what comes with that, and all this judgment about who you are as a person, which quite frankly is highly likely to not be true at all, you know. And so I'm really glad you brought that up, because it is, why are we so drawn as humans to divisiveness rather than inclusiveness? And I'm not talking about some hippie, you know, because I think people would be like,
Yeah.
but there is an element.
Because as we're divided, we can't be strong. And so I think it's intentional as we stay on separate sides, but if we ever unify, oh my goodness.
Well, and I watch Grant, and you do such a great job at that. And I find such hope, honestly, with the younger generations. And it kind of like, that's why I really don't like the environment right now. Because it's like, no, don't stick. This can't stick. Because we've come so far from it. Please don't let this stick.
Right.
You know, it's really interesting. I don't know how you saying like the baggage that comes with like the political candidates, if you were to say one or the other. I feel like I'm always looking at, man, that's a very similar analogy to like why young Christians don't even want to associate like with a denomination,
Right.
or associate even some people that aren't Christians. I think even associate with the church, because it's like, man, I'm a Christian. Oh, you see people shut down when you say
It's true.
that. So it's like, it's a very helpful way for people to realize, because some people, it's like, what are you talking about? The church is awesome. It's like, there's been a lot of young people, I've met so many other people that say, I don't have a problem with God, I don't have a problem with Jesus, but they've somewhere been hurt by a church or a Christian.
Right.
So it's very similar to that baggage, and somehow I think you have to redeem the image of those things, but I think that comes through relationships. About a year ago, after being on a lot of panels for racial reconciliation, I was like, man, you can talk, but what I love is we actually like know each other. It's actually relationships.
Right.
Because sometimes I go to things and it's like, here's a black leader, white leader, Hispanic leader, an Asian leader, but they've never met before. Like,
Right.
And I was like, they're not going to talk about real stuff. Like, they're going to be walking on eggshells.
Right.
Just like, as a Mexican, this is what I think, but I'm not going to say anything that the Asians might like or not like, or the black people might not like. And so I was like, what's really worked historically to create racial reconciliation in this nation? And I started thinking, well, whenever something awesome happens, they usually make a movie about it. So I was like, what movies have they made on racial reconciliation? And I was like, Glory Road, 42,
That's true.
Grace,
That's true.
Remember the Titans, what's the one with the football player, The Blind Side? And I don't know if y'all noticed this pattern, but they're sports movies predominantly.
Right.
And so, and Freedom Riders is another one that's not a sports movie, and it kind of hit me. I think it's when two groups decide they have to come together in close proximity to accomplish something together, creates this getting to know each other, and they all have this similar interest in winning or doing something, that all of a sudden like they become humans to each other and they're humanized instead of just a conversation. So I think accomplishing something requires you to know the other person, and because you have to trust them as a teammate. And so I think you going back to that relationship is there's a lot of talking on Facebook, and even panels sometimes, but not as much. Like what we'll do after this is actually hang out and talk and get to know each other. So just creating formats for that. That's why I love. Which I'm assuming I'm not gonna say what church you go to. I think I know. You're gonna come. I'm thinking of it. Is it? Anyway, just that you guys are creating these spaces for like conversation around that. My church is very similar, like 1/3 of each. And I almost posted this because I had a small group yesterday, and I almost posted, I'm so glad that I get to have this discussion in real life with real friends of different races, instead of just getting updated off Facebook from my black friends posting from a black perspective,
Yeah.
white friends from a white perspective, Hispanic from a Hispanic perspective, but they're predominantly talking to their own group. What I love about this small group that I'm in, it is like, we went back and forth, but at the end of the day, like, the most important color to us, I would say, is red, and it's the blood of
It's the
Christ
blood,
that brought us
absolutely.
together.
Yes.
That's so true. And Wendy and I were talking, how often do we really talk authentically with one another?
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I
we
hope
all,
we do. I think people are fed up with it, and that's what we were just even talking about doing this in the kitchen, because it's
I like
people
that.
talk in the kitchen,
It's
and
good.
and I'll tell you, one of my boys experienced feeling different
yes,
at one point, and he was at the point of tears, and he says, I never want to go back to that
Yeah.
place. And he was deeply wounded. And so my mama bear came out, and my history
And you don't
was
mess
like,
with
oh,
Brenda's
okay.
mama bear.
Right. And so I took a hard stand, and from the mouths of babes, he says, no, Mom, how will they ever know unless I continue to be a part of that community?
Yeah, because it's his testimony.
And in that moment, I was like, you know what, you're right. But we get
So
wounded
hard.
and we pull away, and that doesn't
That's
necessarily help the wound.
No, but there goes the fear again. Okay,
Yes,
so
it's the
fear,
fear.
fear's laced everywhere, and
Yeah.
so it's the fear of what's going to happen, and
Right.
and then you go to the color red, and that one says don't be afraid.
Right.
Good.
Yeah.
So
Because if I had gone to the color red like my son did, I would have
I
leaned
know.
in instead of
so
being ready
nice
to
when the
withdraw.
tables are turned, isn't it?
Mhm.
They're turned on me all the
I've
time.
learned so much from
Yeah,
my
I
kids.
don't know. Like, teach me. Come
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Let me hear.
Yeah. So it's an interesting. One of the things that I've heard you both talk about too is how we clothe ourselves from the inside. That
Okay.
makes a difference to the way we react.
Well, I like that clue.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's no true healing until, I mean, if you're a younger person like our kids, they're not born with racial bias or anything
It's
like
taught.
that.
They're
it's
born
taught.
with no bias.
No
Because
bias
one
whatsoever.
thing we
And that's the thing about relationships, and which have nothing to do with color per se, is that there's an element of compromise. And it's, I feel that as a Christian, or if you come to my home, I want to make sure you're comfortable.
yeah.
And I was talking to my brother the other day, and he says, I am a taller African American man, and sometimes I can sense when someone feels uncomfortable
Yeah.
who comes, that I'm around, but I make sure they know I'm friendly and I'm not, but a lot of, I think that's part of our, needs to be part of our makeup, to go the extra mile.
Good.
We're taught to go the extra mile in school, we're taught to go the extra mile in
Oh,
our achievements, but what about just loving each other?
okay.
Even
Yeah.
if the other person is not, showing us love back, or, I've walked in many a room when I'm the only black person there and everybody's in a clique, but it's up to me. I learned it's up to me to go in and say, hi, how are you doing?
Yeah.
I'm Wendy, and
Right.
and go out of my shell, come out of my shell, instead of saying, oh, everybody was so rude, they didn't even acknowledge me, and I don't even want to go back, and
Yeah.
So,
I like that you say it's going the extra mile, because it shouldn't be that way, but it's like acknowledging one pastor said this one day, I was like, man, if I really did that every time like Jesus did this, it drives me, because I know Jesus did it, and even though I disagree with it, what he said is, Jesus took responsibility for other people's irresponsibility. And so like, I have a face that if I'm not smiling, it looks mad. Like,
Me
it's just
too.
my eyebrows are like,
Me too.
it looks, that I have to do that. And Chelsea, if y'all know my girlfriend,
Smiling.
yeah, you're lucky at least when I smile, my teeth are good. Like, but
My
Chelsea,
teeth are good.
my girlfriend though, she's like the most expressive, joyful person. Like, she doesn't look mad ever. Like, she'd have to work hard to look mad. I don't have to work at all. I can like wake up.
Yeah.
And so I do have to go and do that, especially with and around kids. Like, I do look scary. I got tattoos and stuff. Like, and I gotta make sure I do that. So I have to take the responsibility for others' irresponsibility of. That doesn't. I shouldn't be gauged and viewed just off that. But I can see, like, if I know it's happening, then why not go out of my way to like do something about it?
And going even further, like deeper into the core, because what you described even was junior high locker, like the cafeteria in the junior high, you know, because any kid walks in and sees everyone sitting together and they're the only one that's not. Right. And it's hard. Okay, so I think it's so important to start it in the home. Yeah. Because I think in days gone by, and not so far by, you learned it in school. And you learned hospitality, you learned propriety, you learned decorum.
Yes.
And it was you did not treat somebody else badly. You literally were marched down to the principal's office where you met the head hand. And I sit there today going, what's changed? And I don't know if so much of it is this excessive drive to be better than everybody or whatever, that academic excellence, that it permeates almost everything. And so propriety, decorum, hospitality has exited the scene, and I think that's part of it. And so it does fall. Maybe onus falls more on the home than it probably used to. Maybe we were lazy and let other people do it, but it's not common anymore. And so yes, that hospitality part you brought up is so important. And you know, people crave it. They do crave it. They just would love to be seen and to have a nice word said to them, and maybe their name.
Right.
You know?
Okay, I'm going to throw this out there.
You throw
it. Is it that we are bridled because we are concerned about the way someone's going to react to what we say, what we do? And that whole goes back
there's
to
another fear.
Yeah. And so you can't control someone's reaction, and so therefore we really don't speak authentically in truth.
Yeah.
There's just so many layers to this.
That rude fear.
Yeah.
And not necessarily, if we really look at it, they're not necessarily racial. Some are and some aren't. Some are just personality. Some are just, cultural, relationships and what you learned in your family.
Yeah.
And, we were always taught to, make someone feel at home. And this is probably the South. Someone comes over, we walk up to their car. And I had a girlfriend from the North. She's like, what are you doing? Where are you going? I'm walking you to your car. That's what we do. And,
that is
and we offer them something to eat. And, I want you to be welcome at my home. So I think a lot of it, if we look at it, I look back and some things that happened in college, and I was a panel ed rep, and so we kind of exchanged out with every sorority. We had dinner at their sorority houses. Yeah. And I wasn't very outgoing at all. And so when I go to the sorority house and had dinner at each of the houses, every week, I didn't meet many people other than the person who was assigned to escort me. And I was truly the only African American in that sorority house.
Right.
And, but looking back, I was like, I wasn't very outgoing either.
Yeah.
I could have taken that situation and said they were just snobby and they just didn't, like black people. But looking back, I wasn't very outgoing. And I look at my Christian walk, it's never, I'm like, me again? It's never someone else,
so true.
Me changing somebody else.
Right.
No matter what they're doing. It's never about them changing. It's always about me changing, my reaction.
Wow.
Because that's the only thing you can truly control.
Right.
I can't change my husband, I can't change, I can set the example for my children. I can't change them, but they can see how I have changed.
Which goes back to what you were saying too. It's the living it out, not necessarily the telling. It's it's a much more powerful message.
And then what is it? Is it James? What's the source of quarreling among you? What's the true source of quarreling among you? Is it not your own selfish intentions or something like that, right?
Right.
I wasn't just. I was looking at there's a guy named Tim Elmore, and he does all these studies on like millennials.
Is he the habitude guy?
Yeah, and now he's just fully focused on the Z generation or digital generation. And I read a blog post by him the other day, and he said, talking to parents, that it was titled "Why Your Priorities May Be Hurting Your Kids." And what you prioritize, and he said, whatever is rewarded is repeated, was like the thing. If whatever you reward will be repeated. And he said he realized his kids were doing, you guys kind of mentioned academically good or doing it what everyone thinks, and he said this one quote really messed him up where he's like, man, maybe I missed it. He says, he heard someone say, we need to care less about whether our children are academically gifted and more about whether they sit with a lonely kid in the cafeteria.
Oh.
And like put in athletically gifted. I mean, it's like where do you? What's your shtick? Because your shtick is something, and you're right. And can I just tell you, I really am about the lonely kid in the because in the cafeteria.
Or just even the indifferent, like the one.
Anybody, because years when anyway, we shifted stuff in our house and really put everything on the kids' plates in an effort to be independent, and probably because I was frustrated with them. And in it, every single thing that goes on, like, you know, your chores or anything in your house, the key to it is that someone's on the receiving end. So the key to it is the person. And in the process of doing it, it does, even if you have a rotten, sorry attitude, it becomes less of yourself. And I really did, as I watched that happening, I was sitting there going, when you get out of this car today, and I would tell them, you find the kid on the playground no one's talking to, and you go talk to them. If you're stressed out, you turn to the person next to you, and just for Pete's sake, compliment them on something that's real. You can't be fake, like it's gotta be true. And you know what happened? It totally fed my kid. And which, of course, because that's where those truths that seem countercultural, those truths that seem like they don't make any sense, because it seems like, well, how could that help me? It's amazing that it does. And then the freedom is ushered in. And so even like, you know, whatever environment we walk into, it is diffusing. If you can step up and go to the hospitality, see the other people, have the relationship.
Yeah. I love that you talked about the fear piece, because I do think it is like a perfect love should cast out all fear. And then I was thinking, Malcolm Gladwell did this, like, they had this study. I don't know if it's his study, but I know he like showed it, and I think the tipping point, and it showed that like I think that fears are inherently learned by the way the parents respond to certain things kids do. Like he was saying, like if a kid goes into a dark room, until you show him like, hey, no, like turn the light on, like he just doesn't know that's not okay. Like especially one that's barely walking, or why a kid could go next to a stove and just touch it. Like he has not been taught to. And usually how they respond, so even I think the situation he used was when it's next to this on the second floor of a house, next to the stairs, and you're like, well, get away from that. But it responds to your eyes, like being like, and then that's why some kids can like fall and just kind of be laughing still, but then you act like, oh my gosh, you're okay, and then that's when they immediately, and they cry.
Something's bad.
And then so you show them like what to fear. But if you could show them and reward, I would say if what's rewarded is repeated, then reward them like you did that and you went and reached out to someone that looked different than you, or you hugged that kid, like, oh my God, like the expression of that's going to be repeated of I want to be. You're kind of developing a character in them, even though they may not know that, because you're rewarding. My pastor always ends every sermon with hug someone that doesn't look like you. So he says that every Sunday. Everyone just knows he's going to say, okay, hug someone that doesn't look like you. And what I love is it's not like white person hug a black person, or girl hug someone that dresses different. It goes against class, dress, race, gender, like. It just hugs someone that doesn't look like you.
Because we all look different.
Yes.
You know, except for their identicals. I've got identical twins. But we all look different. But we all look different.
Real. And they're my son's like best friends. And they're the nicest kids. And they're always like, hi, Mrs. Wyman. No, it's hers. And they're over here all the time. And they're so polite and wonderful. Like, hi, Mrs. Wyman, how was your day? And I'm like, it's great, cute you. I'm like, which one are you? It's horrible. I don't know how she does it.
But so hugging someone different, depending on what filter you hear it through, it might mean someone of a different hue, or it might mean someone whose eyes are shaped a little bit differently. You know, so it depends on.
I'm telling you, that is a good word. But so let's end it with. I mean, really, today, because that's an action point. It's relationship, which we've talked about. It's thinking about somebody other than yourself. It's hospitable. And I mean, if you're not like a touching person, I mean, a hug could be like actually smiling and speaking to somebody. And I mean, just take the small step and you never know. And then, gosh, model it not just for the little people that are around you, but the friends that are around you too, because we all want it. You guys are amazing. Thanks so much for coming. And can we just say, to be continued?
Yeah,
For sure. Thanks for walking the road with us.
Yeah.